should have had baby with Paris Hilton over Kim Kardashian.
And I still have my monkey, and I hope to have one.
And I have my monkey.
Uh-huh.
That you gave me.
Yeah.
Was it true? Was Kim K?
Yeah, she used to sleep in my guest room. And then some weird shit happened. I'm not gonna say what happened, but and then she made it to the master bedroom.
What if everything you thought you knew about Kim Kardashian's rise to fame was completely wrong? What if the woman who built $1 billion empire from scratch actually had a blueprint handed to her by someone else? And what if one of hip-hop's biggest producers just exposed the darkest secrets from her past that she never wanted the world to know?
Scott Storch, dog. Yo, he's a dude that make all the beats and shit, yo.
Because that's exactly what just happened. Scott Storch, the legendary producer behind some of your favorite hits, just dropped bombshells about Kim's early days that are sending shockwaves through Hollywood. And when you hear what really went down during those wild Miami nights, you'll understand why Kanye West is out here saying he should have had kids with Paris Hilton instead. This isn't just celebrity gossip. This is the untold story of how an assistant became the most famous woman in the world, and the explosive secrets that powerful people have been keeping buried for over 2 decades. Before Kim Kardashian was breaking the internet, before she was building beauty empires, before she was even a household name, she was just another girl trying to make it in Hollywood. But here's what they don't want you to remember. She was Paris Hilton's assistant. Not her friend, not her business partner, her employee who organized her closets and handled her schedule. And this is where Scott Storch's story gets absolutely wild. The producer who created chart-topping hits for everyone from 50 Cent to Beyonce recently sat down for an interview that has Hollywood scrambling for damage control, because what he revealed about those early 2000s days changes everything we thought we knew about Kim's origin story. Picture this: Miami in the early 2000s, when the music industry was drowning in money and nobody was asking questions about where it came from. Scott Storch was living like a king on Indian Creek Island, one of the most exclusive addresses in the world. He had every car you could imagine, a mansion that looked like something out of a movie, and access to the kind of lifestyle that most people only dream about. But he was also lonely. Despite all the success, all the platinum plaques, all the celebrity connections, he was basically a hermit who went from his house to the studio and back again. That's when Paris Hilton walked into his life, and according to Scott, she didn't just change his routine, she completely transformed who he was as a person. But here's where things get interesting. Kim wasn't just hanging around as Paris's friend during this period. She was staying in Scott's guest room, living there. And according to the producer himself, something happened that changed the entire dynamic of that house. Scott Storch is being very careful about his words, but what he's saying between the lines is absolutely explosive. He admits that Kim used to sleep in his guest room during her time as Paris's assistant. But then he mentions something that has everyone talking. She didn't stay in the guest room forever. Some weird stuff happened, he says, refusing to go into details, and then she made it to the master bedroom. Think about what that means. Kim went from being the help to being the woman of the house, and Paris, who was supposedly her boss and friend, had no idea what was happening right under her nose. Or maybe she did know, and that's why their friendship eventually imploded so dramatically. Scott describes it as commiserating. Both him and Kim were dealing with their own problems, both feeling lost in different ways, and somehow they found each other. But this wasn't just a casual fling between two people figuring things out. This was a strategic move by someone who understood exactly how the game was played, because here's what's really fascinating. Kim was already studying the blueprint. She was watching Paris work the paparazzi, learning how to turn scandal into profit, figuring out how to transform controversy into career opportunities. And she was doing it from the inside, with access to all the behind-the-scenes moments that the public never got to see. Scott even has video evidence of those days. He mentions pulling up to a mansion in his $1 million Bugatti with Kim in the passenger seat, and nobody at the time realized who she was. She was just the girl next to the famous producer, invisible to everyone who would later worship the ground she walked on. The dangerous game of fame. But Scott Storch's story isn't just about Kim's hustle. It's about how toxic that entire world was and how it destroyed people who got too close to the fire. He admits that Paris introduced him to a side of fame that he wasn't prepared for. The paparazzi culture, the non-stop party lifestyle, the constant need to be seen and photographed. She introduced me to the paparazzi, the nightlife, this whole party life that I never experienced before, Scott Scott reveals. I was rich, I had every car you could imagine, but I was just going from the house to the studio and back. And this is where the story gets really dark, because Scott describes how that lifestyle changed him fundamentally. He went from being what he calls a soulful, organic person to someone chasing fame and attention. He started hanging around people he now describes as Hollywood douchebags, people who thought they were better than everyone else. The producer is careful not to name names, saying it would be too disrespectful, but the message is clear: that world was toxic, and it turned good people into something unrecognizable. And Kim was right there in the middle of it all, watching, learning, and planning her next move. Scott even mentions his driver, who used to carry what he calls nose candy in the Mercedes Maybach that followed his Bugatti everywhere. This wasn't just about expensive cars and flashy lifestyle choices. This was about a culture where dangerous substances were as common as champagne, where people were spiraling out of control while maintaining perfect public images. The blueprint for building an empire. What makes Kim's story so fascinating is how she took everything she learned from that world and made it work for her instead of against her. While Scott Storch was falling apart, while Paris was becoming a cautionary tale, Kim was building something that would make them both look like amateurs. She followed what Scott calls Paris's blueprint, especially when it came to making strategic moves that would keep her in the headlines. But Kim understood something that Paris never quite grasped. Controversy was just the beginning. The real money was in turning that controversy into legitimate business opportunities. Scott describes Kim during those early days as organic and hungry, someone who was genuinely determined to build something for herself. She wasn't just riding on someone else's coattails. She was studying the game from every angle, figuring out what worked and what didn't, and preparing to launch her own version that would be bigger and better than anything that came before. And it worked. Within a few years, Kim had gone from organizing Paris's closets to becoming more famous than Paris ever was. She turned a scandal into a reality show into a business empire, and a business empire into billionaire status. All while the people who taught her the game were struggling to stay relevant. Which brings us to Kanye West's recent meltdown, and why his comments about wishing he had kids with Paris instead of Kim are so much more significant than they initially appeared. Because Kanye wasn't just making a random comment about preferring blondes. He was expressing regret about getting involved with someone whose entire career was built on manipulation and strategic calculation. During a recent live stream, Kanye dropped a bombshell that sent shockwaves through social media. I should have had babies with Paris Hilton over Kim Kardashian. You know, Kim was Paris Hilton's assistant, but it gets worse. Kanye admits that he didn't want to have children with Kim after just 2 months of dating her. 2 months! But he claims it wasn't God's plan, which sounds like someone trying to rationalize a decision that he knew was wrong from the beginning. Think about what that means. Kanye, one of the most successful artists of all time, is essentially admitting that he got trapped by someone who used the same tactics on him that she learned while working for Paris Hilton. The student had become the master, and even someone as savvy as Kanye fell for it. And now he's paying the price. He mentions that Kim's only power is taking his kids away from him, which suggests that their relationship has become a power struggle where the children are being used as weapons. This isn't just a messy divorce, this is psychological warfare being played out in public.
The hidden tapes nobody talks about, but here's where things get really disturbing. According to multiple sources, Kanye has been working behind the scenes to keep certain tapes from being released. Not just the famous Ray J video that everyone knows about, but multiple recordings that could destroy reputations and end careers. Kanye has apparently been flying around the country, making deals, paying people off, doing whatever it takes to keep these tapes buried. And the fact that he's still doing this years after their divorce suggests that whatever is on those recordings is absolutely devastating. This isn't just about protecting Kim's reputation. This is about protecting his own legacy and making sure his children don't grow up in a world where their mother's darkest secrets are public knowledge. But it's also about power. Whoever controls those tapes controls the narrative, and Kanye is terrified of what happens if he loses that control. Scott Storch's revelations add another layer to this story. If Kim was already involved in questionable situations during her assistant days, if she was already making moves that crossed ethical lines, then what happened later becomes much more significant. The tapes might not just be about one scandal, they might be evidence of a pattern of behavior that goes back decades. The price of playing the game. What's really tragic about all of this is how it's affected everyone involved. Scott Storch admits that his time in that world fundamentally changed who he was as a person. He went from being focused on music and creativity to being obsessed with image and status, and it nearly destroyed his career. Paris Hilton,
who was once the most famous person in the world, has been reduced to a footnote in other people's success stories. She created a template for modern celebrity culture, but she couldn't adapt when the game changed. And Kanye, despite all his success, is clearly struggling with the consequences of his choices. He's a billionaire who sounds like he would trade everything to go back and make different decisions about his personal life. The only person who seems to have come out ahead is Kim herself. She took everything she learned from that toxic world and used it to build something unprecedented. But at what cost? Her marriage fell apart, her relationships with her family are constantly scrutinized, and she's raising children in an environment where privacy is impossible. Scott Storch's interview is just the beginning. Industry insiders are starting to talk more openly about what really happened during those early 2000s days, and the picture they're painting is disturbing. This wasn't just about young people making mistakes, this was about a culture that rewarded manipulation and punished authenticity. The producer's story about Kanye visiting his studio with Dr. Dre is particularly telling. He describes how Kanye came in, asked for a photo, left, then came back in a completely different outfit to retake the same photo. When Dre and Scott exchanged confused looks, Kanye eventually stormed out and called Dre the devil. This suggests that even back then, Kanye was struggling with the disconnect between his spiritual beliefs and the reality of the entertainment industry. He was trying to maintain his integrity while operating in a world that demanded compromise. And eventually that internal conflict drove him to make decisions that he's still regretting today.
What this means for the future. The truth about Kim Kardashian's rise to fame is finally starting to come out, and it's more calculated and controversial than anyone imagined. She didn't just get lucky or work harder than everyone else. She studied the game, learned from the masters, and then surpassed them all using techniques that they taught her. But success built on manipulation and strategic calculation comes with a price. The relationships suffer, the children grow up in dysfunction, and eventually the truth starts to surface. Scott Storch's revelations are just the first crack in a dam that's been holding back decades of secrets. And as more people start talking, as more industry insiders decide to tell their stories, the full scope of what happened during those early days is going to become clear. This isn't just about one woman's rise to fame. This is about an entire culture that prioritized image over substance, controversy over authenticity, and power over human connection. The question isn't whether more revelations are coming. The question is whether the people involved are ready for the consequences when the whole truth finally comes out. Because based on what Scott Storch has already revealed, we've only scratched the surface of a story that's much darker and more complex than anyone realized. What do you think about these explosive revelations? Are you surprised by Scott Storch's admissions about Kim's early days? And do you believe there are more secrets waiting to be exposed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this conversation is just getting started. And if you want to stay updated on all the latest celebrity exposés and industry secrets, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.